Hello, welcome to another Data Stream Live. Today we're joined by Steve Fuster from Tick9. Steve, how are you doing?
Yeah, all good, thank you. Yeah.
Good, yeah. Do you want to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, what it is you do?
Yeah, so we're Tick9. My name's Steve Fuster. I'm the founder. We've been going about 9 years now. Ultimately, we are a data management company. We help people manage their data and visualize that data, and also help automate processes around their operational systems by integrating that data as well.
Oh, very nice. Great to have you on. So you started 9 years ago. How did it all begin? Why did you decide to go into business for yourself, and why data visualization?
Ooh, how do we simplify that down? So I suppose when I think, ultimately, where the main driver came from was ultimately being able to deliver the same sort of services to local businesses and probably smaller end of the market from projects that I've been working on historically. So I've worked for 20 plus years in the software channel around ERP and CRM products predominantly. So working with people like Sage, Microsoft, NetSuite, Business Central, Dynamics. So I've done lots of projects around those, and that prior to COVID involved lots of travel historically. So I'd be away 2 or 3 nights a week. Had a young family, so I thought, right, okay, I must be able to do all of this stuff locally and serve a purpose to those businesses that we've got that live and work around myself. So yeah, took the plunge and sort of like ended up starting off as an independent and then growing a little team off the back of
And
more and more
you
people
said you got
wanting to
experience
use
in
our
ERP
services, really.
and sort of more the traditional sort of software side. Why did you not go into the ERP and the NetSuite and that side? Why did you pick data visualization?
Because I think even, I suppose, going back all of those years, right back from probably, and I'm talking sort of like mid to late 90s, is probably when I was starting to get involved in those types of projects. Even though we were delivering ERP projects, the key element for me that was always the exciting part. So I was always working in the pre-sales. So I was always doing the scoping with the prospect or account management with the client. The bit that always sort of like got the interest from the directors and the decision makers was, right, okay, what's this going to do for my business? And that generally always revolved around the last part of the demo, which always tended to be the dashboards. So, whether or not, we could spend, in some cases, I used to do demonstrations that lasted 3 or 4 days when people were making major decisions around ERP. Ultimately, that last 3 hours on the Thursday afternoon when we're trying to wrap up was sort of like, right, okay, now what? We've processed all of this stuff in ERP. What do we get out the back of it? So that the excitement, we always had a decision to make as to whether or not we were looking to show the sexy part of the demo at the beginning, because we weren't sure the directors were going to stay in the meeting, or actually, if we could keep their attention and we've got the directors at the end of the meeting, it would always be the dashboards and the business intelligence. So ultimately, trying to deliver the value for the business is, and that was for me where always got exciting in from a demonstration point of view. I suppose if software can be called exciting, but that's where the people who were looking to make the decision really saw the value displayed from
Do you
changing
think
the
ERP providers do enough
come through the
from the
dashboards.
ERP software solution side for data visualization, or is it more of an afterthought, do you think, from their perspective as a solution provider?
I think that's changing. I would have said over the last 5 years, I think that's becoming more prevalent. And again, it's probably easier for me having stepped out of that ERP channel to, the motivations historically have all been, we want licenses from the software perspective in our platform. So we want the users in our ERP platform. And to enable that, we've got to stop people going outside of the platform to get things they can't have. So we've got to have an element of dashboarding and reporting within the ERP. So that has got better. But I think ultimately what's also changed is that, historically people used to think that ERP was a one-stop shop and that we could get everything we needed in one system. And that's just not the case these days. There's so many facets to every business. Most people now will end up with more than one system. And ERP is a very old-fashioned term, really. I still have to qualify that people, that enterprise resource planning. What does that mean? Well, okay, that covers finance, possibly distribution and logistics, manufacturing, retail. So, it's a wide 3-letter
Yeah.
acronym that I should always put a pound in the pot, to be honest, if I don't explain it. But, I think there's always an element of dashboarding being within those tools. But as soon as a business has more than one tool, in theory, that dashboarding doesn't become irrelevant. It just becomes, it's not complete. So how am I going to get a complete set of reporting if I've not got a tool
Yeah.
outside of
You're
my
saying there
main
that ERP's been
operational
around for
system that
about
I can
20
pull
years.
together?
And I don't know about you, but I've got about 3 or 4 customers at the minute that are just starting their ERP implementation journey. Even 20 years later, are you seeing the same thing? Of people slow of
Yes.
now eventually coming around to implementing ERPs?
Yeah,
Mm.
I think that's a permanent cycle. I think, they're at a certain size and complexity of business, they, ultimately they will need a capable system, whether or not that's referred to as ERP, or whether or not that's a platform that enables you to build your own apps, or you go bespoke and you have somebody write it for you, which again is a different discussion in its own right to a certain extent as to whether or not you build or buy. But ultimately, there's still a cycle of people doing, ERP replacements. One of the ultimately, it's probably one of the extra strands that we have within Tick9 is that we've got probably half of the team have been through anywhere between 300 and 500 of those ERP implementations. So we've seen,
Right.
and I've been involved in some good ones, some bad ones, and some indifferent ones. Ultimately, um, so and at the end of the day, most people are either changing ERP because the current one doesn't do what they want, or they don't even have one, or they may have been acquired and that they've got to get onto one that the
Right.
group have dictated should be the one that they're using across the platform. So there's still as much activity for me in that ERP space and replacement as there always was. Really, I think that nowadays it's just more
What?
problematic
Yeah.
because there's so many to choose from. So ultimately, I think that just means that you have to be very, much more
Yeah, and it's really
open-minded
important
about
that. And
what you
why do you
need and
think
what you
that
want to get out of it.
so many ERP implementations go wrong or don't survive, or a couple of years in, they're now switching to another one? Why do they go wrong?
Um, yeah, so this could be a tricky answer, really. So, ultimately, where that there's I think there's two key areas to this. One is not being explicit and clear around what you think your requirements are before you go into any selection or demonstration process. And ultimately, there's a couple of tips even around that point, really. So I even help people get to
Right.
that point in saying, right, you've got to be very clear about what you think you want it to do, and you need to have a process of how you manage that data in its own right. So if you're going to have 1, 3, or 23 people in a room, don't get distracted by the demonstration. Make sure you're scoring that in some format, spreadsheet will be fine, to say, actually, these are the 25 things that we need it to do. And actually, we're each person scoring how well they think they see that across the demo. Because there's some nuances around how to deal with those software providers. Because having been on the other side, where they're either wanting to get in first or last to either set the bar or be the last one that you remember. Because if you're not making scores,
Right.
most people will generally buy from people. So generally what you'll find is that not always the best software gets selected for the requirements you need. If you get a rapport with a pre-sales person and a salesperson, that's our job to try and do that. But ultimately, being able to, I suppose, blinkered, make sure you're getting the right requirements delivered through the demo, not that the fact that you've seen somebody demonstrate the best to you or have the best presentation. And then phase the other key part of that is then ensuring you're skilling up and you've got time enabled for your deployment. Most people underestimate the amount of effort required to do that change, and actually, in most cases, we made quite a big change early 2000 where we would have a dedicated team that was there to manage the client's responsibility. Most clients, when they buy new
Mm.
software, think, all right, those guys are going to do it all for us, and actually that's not the case. So most people underestimate the amount of change required to get those new processes in place, the software changed. Because really, the history comes from most people want to change system because they believe it's not working for them. And actually, in most cases, that comes about because staff rotation and people leaving the business means that people operating the system do what I call hand-me-down training. So those people that are new in role are only learning 10 to 20% of how it was originally. And if they don't find a way to do that themselves, they'll end up creating their own
Yeah.
systems, which invariably end up either in Excel, handwritten, Access, other platforms. That means all of a sudden you started to work outside
Right.
of the
Okay.
ERP
That makes
before,
sense.
instead of coming back
Going back
into the ERP.
to data visualization, then I mean, I feel like we could do a
Yeah.
whole episode just on ERP systems and the dangers and the benefits. But
Yeah.
what is the current state of play? Do you reckon at the minute for businesses regarding data visualization? What are they faced with at the minute?
I think it's as vitally important as it was at any stage, really. I think, I still go into lots of businesses and we still see people handballing data into Excel. Excel is the lowest common denominator. And I think, from a data visualization point of view, it's at the really simple level, it's about giving people the right information at the right time and to the right user to make those decisions. And ultimately, visualization of data can be quite straightforward, but it's got to be, it's got
Mm,
to come from the top down. What really matters to the business in regards what do we need to see, and actually off the back of that, it's also got to be, what's going to drive action. There's no point in just putting numbers up on a TV screen in the office or
mm,
sending them out via email if nobody's going to do any of those things. A lot of the time, I'll go into businesses and say, right, okay, as a test, if they've not got anything, when we try and deploy a new system,
mm.
let's switch off your existing reporting and see who shouts, because that's the best test to see whether or not it's actually in use. If it goes off for 24 hours and
Right.
nobody says anything, it's not doing the right thing.
No.
Ultimately, that means it's not driving any action, because in theory. Um, so I think most people, yeah, for me, it's about being able to analyze the data accurately and
So you,
drive
you
some,
you mentioned
drive some
Excel there.
action
Is
within the
Excel the
business.
enemy?
Um, off the Not at
Mm,
all. No, I think I'm a big fan of Excel where it's well used. When we're dealing with most projects, they all have some form of external data stored in a format that is in Excel. So, ultimately, whether that's for reclassification or just tidying up bits or, putting some different hierarchies of
mm,
analysis into the data set, it's always there. So, for me, again, it's about making the team that's working in the project aware of what to do and not to do in Excel to make it work with some of the platforms that we're trying to utilize. And again, some of that is just down to the fact that most people, if they haven't got anything from a visualization point of view, are just handballing data in Excel and giving it to the MD or the business owner or the department head and say, right, there you go, I've done that for you. And if they're lucky, they might have come across pivot tables. You know, that'll save
yeah.
them hours. If
The
they haven't come
amount, the
across
amount of
pivot
time I've
tables,
seen someone
we
accidentally
normally show them
move one
pivot
of the
tables.
fields out of a pivot table and everyone panics because they don't know how to get the field back in. uh,
Yeah, yeah. It's the most underutilized tool that's been
mm,
in there. I think I think it came out in the mid-90s, in reality. I remember it when it first came out. It was like this holy nirvana thing, along with,
right.
I think we were working with SQL 6.5 and 7 back then, but that was the start of, wow, this is a brilliant tool to, help us build these things automatically, really. So I still show people pivot tables today and they're still wowed, rather than having to work down the rows of data,
Yeah.
insert a row, do an at sum of
Can you
all of
touch
that
on
above,
why having
three,
total
and you're pretty
rows
much good
in
to go,
a
really.
table instead of a pivot table is so annoying for people like us?
Yeah, well, it's extra work. It's not the underlying data. So really, we've got, I
Mm,
suppose, a technical term, we've got different levels of granularity. We would refer that to. So we've got detail and we've got summary. In
right.
reality, when we're trying to work and build dashboards, we want one or the other. Having a mix of the actual, detail rows and also trying to work out which one of those is actually a total, because that's either going to double the numbers or it's going to, when we give it to somebody to validate, they'll say, well, you're at 2 million
Mm,
and we should be at 1 million. Well, that's actually because 1 million's held in the total row. So, that's, and again, that's part of the education piece where, for me, this all probably stems back to whether that's apprenticeships or schooling or even just onboarding new staff into the business, that there's a big gap around how we
mm.
educate people around the understanding of data and how to analyze data.
How
And
valuable do
there's
you think
tools
it is,
available and
this
courses out there to
education
help
of
businesses
data
with that.
skills to current employees and new people coming up, students and things?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's paramount, really. Everything's data related these days. I think it
Mm,
touches everything that a business does day to day, really. Um, there are so having people who understand what we can do with it, how to analyze it. If you're not managing your data, how can you know your data? Or most people are operating from a gut feel. If they've got no reporting or visualization or understanding of how things that are happening in the business do happen, then without people who can analyze data, ultimately even just the basics,
mm,
understanding what the average or the min, max, and means are, is a basic level of understanding. And a lot of businesses don't have people that are capable of that. So we do an element of education around data literacy ultimately, and I think it's definitely becoming more and more
Do you think
important day
that
to day as people start to
the
understand
increase
the value
in
of data.
tools
Really.
available is making it harder for businesses and individuals to know which way to turn? In terms of before, it was just Excel, but now I've got Google Sheets. Before, it was pretty much just Power BI. Now I can think of maybe 6 to a dozen of different competitors, as well as alternatives for databases and everything in between. Do you think that has a role to play?
Definitely, I think I think that makes
Mm,
the decision process more difficult to understand what the differentiator between all of these tools. Ultimately, I think that where that comes back to is that really, as businesses, they've got to find a trusted partner
mm,
that isn't just going to deliver a tool; it's actually going to deliver a solution. And actually, the tool is exactly that. For me, when I go around to people and we talk, I still have my kit bag or my tool bag, just like a plumber or electrician, and I've got maybe a dozen tools in there. And actually, really, the client's not really bothered which set of tools I use, as long as I give them, in this case, the bathroom or my electric's working. Ultimately, I want to be able to plug something in and I know it's going to work. And that's what almost the data visualization side
mm,
of it now has become what I would refer to as commoditized. So, any of the tools will
yeah.
do visualization. That's almost the easy part. Actually, getting quality, managing the data, making sure it's accurate, that we've got owners who
It's a
know
really
what
good
that
analogy. I
means,
quite like the plumber and
is
I
probably
sort of like the
becoming more and more
bathroom
important.
analogy where you don't really care what type or brand of pipe they're using, but you might care about the color of the tile and the aesthetic stuff
Yeah,
that you can see.
no,
But you just want a trusted partner just to crack on with it.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, because I think more and more where and this comes through experience and working on a number of projects,
Mm,
but we ultimately really are interpreters. So, and actually, we speak to managers, senior management, or directors or owners of the business, and what they're wanting, they want to be able to talk how they talk, and for us to interpret that and translate that
mm,
into an end result without having to explain, you know, the I's and dotting the T's and that, sorry, crossing the T's, etc. But we tend to operate in a slightly different way in that through that experience, the experienced people in the project will be more responsible for developing the scope of a project. So most people are aware of a scope of a project, but we try and stay
right.
away from the client having to define the scope, because ultimately what tends to happen in other projects that I've seen is that we'll go in, spend some time with a business, we'll then hear their understanding of the problem, we'll then write it down in our terminology and ask them to then translate that back by signing it off. So all of a sudden now we want the client to understand our translation of their requirement that they gave us already,
Mm,
actually, and we want them to understand that in our technical terms. So, the scope documents are probably a bit more of an old-fashioned way of doing it. You have to have some outlines and you have to understand what the deliverables are, but ultimately, we try and get that interpretation piece is becoming key and understanding how we apply that those
mm.
requirements to the tools that we
That's
have and
interesting. So
also
we've spoken
specifically to the
about
business is
how
becoming more and
important it
more
is
important,
that
really.
business people are trained and upskilled in data skills. How important is it for the other way around for data professionals to be trained and upskilled in business acumen and things like that and domain knowledge?
Yeah, that's key. And that there's only two ways of probably acquiring that, and one is through training and one is through experience. So ultimately, we're what we started to do. We have a lot of shadowing. Most of our team are either following or listening in on most of the
Right.
calls that we have with clients, even if they're not going to directly contribute. So, being able to understand, when you're dealing with individual users or businesses who have senior management, most of those
Mm.
have some form of accounting background. They work in logistics or manufacturing. So, we're doing pieces of training with our guys to understand, right, okay, what is a trial balance? What is T accounting? So even if they've not come back, even if not they've not come with a background of what accounting is, at least to be able to understand and sit in a
Yeah.
room with somebody that understands what an aged debtors is, or an aged creditors, or goods received not invoiced, or foreign currency gains and losses. Those types of things are the words that your users will be giving out when you're asking for requirements, and those are the things that you've got to be able to recognize and at least say, actually, that was important. Let me put that down so I can at least either ask a question as what it is. So, for me, that's vitally important. And again, you only understand that through doing projects, being involved with them, but also
No, of
hearing that
course.
from the
So
clients,
if a company's watching this and thinking, yeah,
firsthand,
we don't
really.
have, I've heard of data visualization, I've seen it for years, I've been to many suppliers and they've got dashboards all over the TVs and on tablets and desktops and whatever. What are
Yeah.
the immediate sort of breakthroughs and benefits to that company when they get started with a data viz project?
Yeah. And I think for me, that goes back to, I suppose, experience. I think from my point of view, the breakthrough piece really there, we've got a number where, I mean, it can be quite simple ones, really. I mean, even at a finance level, we've had customers who had multiple, we've got a customer who had maybe, how many did they have? Must have had maybe close to a dozen different ERP systems within the group. And at that point, something simple like an aged debtors report that aggregated that information across 12 databases immediately allowed them to recover £1 million in cash that was due but
Mm,
wasn't being chased or actually being paid. So again, within 3 to 4 weeks, that
right.
allowed them to almost have payback on the project. So right down to being able to, some of the others are related to manufacturing businesses that, being able to link multiple data sets together in real time, especially with this IoT stuff that's, kicking off and been around for quite a while. In reality, being able to monitor machines in real time and be efficient for when our, in massive production plants where you've got maybe 50 machines, being able to pre-plan when you're going to have downtime based on a schedule of how much has been run through that machine, and have the 2 or 3 people that would normally handle that change available, as opposed to we need 12 people
Mm,
available because actually we don't know when those changes are going to happen. So becoming efficient, and for each business that'll differ. I think ultimately when we go in and present, because normally as part of our process we'll do some scoping, we'll then present back a bit of a mock-up of some sample data. But with that sample data, I'm also trying to tell the
right.
business two or
Okay.
three things that they didn't know before I came in. So ultimately they'll sit in a room and I'll, and the best thing to do is, I'll do a demonstration with some directors of a business. I start, okay, who are your top 10 customers? And you think, wow, everybody knows that. And actually most people can only get seven
Yeah.
or eight. There'll always be
Yeah.
one or two that they struggle to, oh, forgot about them. And that's the gut feel. So gut feel tells them seven or
Yeah,
eight.
I found the
The
same
one
thing
or
with gross
two is why
profit.
they
If
have
I ever
these
asked, like,
tools
what
put
was
in
your gross
place.
profit today, or this week, or this month, this quarter? Like, oh, we don't know until the board meeting. When they've had to get a team of people doing it. So you
Yeah,
mentioned
yeah,
that about IoT devices and 12 different
yeah,
databases, otherwise known as data silos, and an increasing number of data silos is providing a headache for
yeah.
businesses. Is it also providing an opportunity for data viz experts and an increase in data visualization to help bring it all together?
Definitely. I think, yeah, I think that's,
Mm,
we take that as granted now that there's going to be more than one data source. Ultimately, I think really what we're trying to do is almost get to a point where we can take that pain away from the business, really, that they do have, they've got their marketing in HubSpot, they've got the finance in Sage or Business Central, and they've got the CRM somewhere else, and they've got manufacturing data over here, and they might have a spreadsheet with some budget information in. Ultimately, those, historically they used to provide problems. How do I get all of that data? How do I get it real time? And actually, we still do have to work in a lot of cases without real time data, but at
mm,
least as long as it's well managed, then we can bring it all together. But ultimately getting to a point where we have a working proof of concept.
Right.
I'm always looking to do that within the first 2 or 3 days. Within our projects, I'm looking to make sure we've got connectivity to everything we need, and actually having a working proof of concept that the users can see a bit of recognizable data. And actually, with most first dashboards, it won't look pretty. And I'm not suggesting any of them look pretty, actually, but there will be a functional data. There'll be a functional data
Mm.
visualization that at least, oh, I recognize that, and I can see those numbers, and they look pretty close. But then we've then got to do a bit of due diligence and validation. But at least it gives the customer a bit of comfort that we're going to start to bring those together. And I think what is becoming evident is that as people deploy more and more systems, the reporting aspect almost doesn't get talked about until the very end, and that's almost too late. So, the classifications that people want to
Yeah.
analyze customers by, they've not thought about putting those into HubSpot. And actually, are those the same ones that they've got in the finance system? Yes, no, possibly not.
Yeah.
So ultimately, how do I identify those together? You know, Invariably we'll end up using the email address. If the
Yeah.
email address is the same, it's got to be the same person, actually, the same company, you know, or that number, or so that I think really trying to educate the business on operational systems, and when they change a
Yeah.
system, to put some thought into what the end goal
No,
needs to look
absolutely.
like
Lots
before
to unpack
they
there. What
start to rate
I didn't
transactions
want
for it.
to forget about is when you were talking about it might not look pretty. How much value do customers put on them looking pretty, the dashboards and things like that? Yeah.
I think they'd rather have it accurate and fast than pretty, if I'm honest. And I think pretty can come later when it needs to be presented either externally to other members of the team that have not seen it. But ultimately, I think, it does. Things can be nice, but with things that are nice, they tend to be sometimes too simple, and they take the complexity out of it, which is what we're trying
Mm.
to do. Ultimately, everybody wants to be a bit like, I suppose, Apple, and they open up the
Yes.
box and it just works, and they like the opening of the box experience. But ultimately, we're not buying
Yeah.
a hard, we're not delivering the same thing that Apple deliver every
Yeah.
time. We're delivering something that's different and handcrafted and capable to the business, so it will vary. So, again, I like. I'm not the best one for colours. The team will have
Black
a
and
go at me.
white.
Don't you can show anything to Steve and he'll be happy. I have, yeah, as long as
Yeah.
it's supposed to be £1 million and it says it's £1 million, I'm good with that. And I think for me, I really, you generally only get one or two goes possibly to get
Mm.
confidence in the business that actually what you're showing them is accurate. If it's going to take too long to make it
Right.
accurate, it means actually the process to get to that endpoint is not working
Mm.
properly. So, either the systems aren't supporting that, or
Yeah.
one of the
So
users
you
isn't
want
following
functional over
procedures
flair.
that you put in place. So, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I think flair can come, you know. And again, going back to the bathroom analogy, I'm probably
Yeah,
a functional
you want the
user as
toilet to
opposed to, oh,
flush and
look,
the water to come
the
out of the
mirror looks
shower
nice.
as long as that as
Correct. Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
correct. And as
I
long as it's
find
not
as
the other
well
way
that
around, and
customers
actually I'm in a
sometimes are
different room, we're all
happy,
good.
would obviously love flair if they could pick it, but then when you talk about cost, they don't really want to pay for it as much. I guess going back to the Apple scenario, yes, you can pay through the nose and we can make it look like a Picasso, but a lot of people then, I think, when you put it in that perspective, don't
Yeah.
want to pay for it.
Correct. Yeah, and I think if that is going to be charged for more, I think unless there's a specific reason, whether or not we do some reporting with public sector where that has to go out and it has to be externally viewed on a website, or I think branding's perfectly fine. If it's following company colours and it's got logos in the right place and it looks nice. And again, I think ultimately
Mm.
the use of the dashboard itself, if it's interactive, does need to be driven by the user. So we reiterate as fast as we can through either weekly or bi-weekly sprints to get to the point where rather than prescribing it up front, we'll let the
Right.
user use it, and each week they can give us feedback, and how we make minor tweaks. And I'd much rather, for me, the evidence of a
Mm.
good dashboard is
Yeah.
it is it still being used when we leave the building.
I like that. So,
That
how
would be
have
the
current
key
data
driver for me.
visualization practices evolved to where they are now? I mean, obviously, it's not as new as say like ChatGPT and everyone's talking about AI at the minute, machine learning. Data visualization has been around quite a while and probably longer than people think it has been. How has it changed to where it is today?
So I think. what is definitely happening, and is that the tools are
Mm,
becoming better at helping users put dashboards together. So, what type of chart should I be using for this type of analysis? Should it be a bar chart? Should it be a line chart? Am I doing comparative? Am I doing a percentage of? Or, that there's a lot more up front where the users can get assistance in just throw in theory, throw
mm,
some data onto the sheet and tell me what I should be doing with it. And I think the tools are slowly getting there. I mean, I remember back in the early versions of English language query has been around in SQL since about again late 90s, early
mm,
2000s. So we were trying to use the what are my sales this
yeah,
year, 2000, let alone in 2024. I think what's happened is that the tooling's got better and the mechanisms are better, where it actually can start to correlate that
right,
to the underlying data sets without interference. You know, Again, in reality, to get the best out of those tools, I still think there needs to be an element of a catalog or a dictionary, or at least some assistance to the platform to
yeah.
tell it what a revenue is,
So
or if it's turnover,
that
or
probably
if it's
leads into my
sales,
next
or if it's
question, which
X,
is
Y, Z.
what are the
Um,
future pitfalls and what are you guys helping companies to avoid? What mistakes are you trying to help them avoid?
yeah, good question. I think there's I
Yeah,
think the biggest opportunity is to help them with the data quality and the management of the data. I think, ultimately, without good quality data, none of these AI
yeah,
tools, none of the visualization can actually work easily. You're always going to be having, if
mm,
you don't put any effort in at the front end to capture it accurately, uh, first time and only once, hopefully, then you're always going to be sort of like chasing your tail and trying to, right, okay, we need to fill that field, or we need to populate that, or we need to re-engineer it, or we need to
mm,
take the spaces out of the postcode, we need to put the spaces in the postcode, whatever the issue is. I think that all comes from your core systems. And ultimately, you've got to, we can cleanse as we go, but that becomes more and more
of course.
difficult as the more systems you have and the more data you have. So I think it's definitely about trying to get
Right.
ownership of the data and the quality of the data key
So if you
to
could
feed
describe
those
an
decisions moving
ideal
forward, really.
best case scenario, the perfect player that has got all this sort of technology, the data visualization set up, everything's connected, they've got how does it look? How would you describe it? A company that, what kind of company would
That's a
you
good,
walk into and
wow,
go,
that's
you
a
know
million dollar
what, you don't
question.
need me?
Yeah, that,
Mm,
I, those are very rare, I would have said, especially the SME space where, and again, I probably need to qualify that. That can be anybody
mm,
from 1 million turnover to 100 million turnover. No business I've been into or that we tend to work with has data
mm,
analysts sat on the side waiting to just analyze your data. So what people I think are moving more and more to is that there's maybe a continuous improvement person, there's maybe a business systems owner. So we're starting to help them more to be able to deliver, you know, accurate reporting information to the business. And that stems again with all the tooling that's available. There's a number of platforms. We're quite traditional in that we help people with Power BI and Click. Those are our two main ones. There are others available, obviously, but from my experience of those two tools
right,
goes right back to probably 2005 and prior to that. So, that's just from experience that those two platforms at a visualization level can do a good job. Then depending on how you manage your data is where which will dictate where we go next from there. I think that there's again going back to I, we live this stuff day in day out, and I have trouble keeping on top of all the new entrants to the market,
mm,
the updates to the monthly releases that come out of every platform. So I think really what I'm
right,
always trying to do is help businesses simplify the decision process. I think the platform and the tooling is becoming less relevant, and I think as long as they see their end result, they're not really bothered whether it's a Mercedes that drives them there, a BMW, or
yeah.
a I don't know, a
So you mentioned
Volkswagen.
Power BI
I
and
need to be
Click
careful
there.
what I pick
What,
there.
just for the audience, what do you recommend? What are the differences? Why should someone go for Power BI or Click over Power BI or QLick, as I've heard some people refer to it as? So, which what's normally your advice?
Yeah, that's another one as well. So I think both are great visualization tools. I think at that point we do just as much Power BI from a visualization point of view as we do with Click. I think for me, the difference comes from who's
Right.
going to be managing that data behind the scenes and cleaning it. So I think we tend to veer towards Click in that sense because the single platform for us allows us to do all of that within the similar skill set. I think for me, for businesses, they've got to address who's going to be managing that for them moving forward. And for me, there's a longer list of skills required for the Azure platform, because once you're out of Power BI desktop and publishing to workspaces, with the tooling that they have a massive tool set, and trying to get
Yeah.
certified and approved for that is very difficult for our guys to keep on top of. So for end users, we're trying to keep it to a simple point where they are literally, most of our clients either fall into, we want to do it ourselves, so we'll help them train them on whichever their preferred tool is, or we don't have time to do the data engineering. Can you do the data engineering for us, Steve? We might dabble with our dashboard builds and want to tweak them. So ultimately, we'll tend to veer to Click to do that data management and provision that data in a clean,
Right.
authorized, managed
Okay.
way that
Fantastic.
allows them to have
Conscious
confidence
of
in building
time.
their own
Talk to me then
dashboards.
about Tick9. Who do you want to talk to? Who you're looking to speak to? Who should contact you? How? All of that.
Mm. So I think anybody who's got data challenges, that they want to possibly bring together lots of data in different
Mhm.
formats, or even just actually go through the process of assessing what they have. Now, like I said, data is part one for us. What people tend to find is that once we've got into the data project and we've delivered something for them, we also get heavily involved in their ERP and CRM just because of our natural backgrounds. We help them start to deliver, continuous improvement, whether that's on Sage, Business Central, NetSuite, SAP, Sage, Xero. We'll help them start to automate those processes
Mm.
around those platforms because we've got experience. So what we end up doing is, in a lot of cases, is helping the client manage their relationship with their ERP provider
Right.
and making sure that their ERP
Okay.
provider is actually delivering
So
what they want
anyone that wants to
and giving them
either
back money.
start or develop their data capabilities for their business should get in touch. Are there any industries or sectors that you specialize in, or is it
Correct.
industry agnostic?
We're probably agnostic, but we do have for whatever
Mhm.
reason, we've picked up quite a lot in the
Yeah.
logistics business. So we've got quite a lot of
Mm.
transport businesses. They have a plethora of data um, and systems, manufacturing and distribution.
Yeah.
So that's just the business is geared towards that because myself and the other two guys, our ERP background was all distribution and manufacturing. So getting into bills of materials, work in progress, goods received not invoiced, standard versus actual. That's standard stuff that we talk to people around. Okay, where do we get that from? How do we make it work better in your ERP? And how do we deliver that to
Mm. Yeah,
a
of course.
dashboard for ops
No,
directors
sounds
or,
great.
or,
Well,
or
I've got
directors?
one final question for you, Steve, because I just thought of it whilst we were talking a minute ago. I thought we can't have an episode on data visualization without me asking you this, because I was speaking to somebody about it the other day, and I'm just going to ask you to see what you think is pie charts. Thoughts, feelings, concerns, because I know that the data viz community is
Okay.
quite divided on pie charts, and I really wanted to get your hot take.
My, I believe they are a waste of space, if I'm honest. The only thing I do use them for is a bit of is try and get a giggle out of any demonstration that I'm doing. So when I'm doing training on pie charts, I say, look, here we can go for the savory route, or we
Yeah,
can, you can either have a donut pie
yeah,
chart or you can have a full pie, savory or sweet. Uh, I think they do
yes,
serve the purpose. I think the clients love them. But actually, once we give them the reality that
yeah.
it's a lot of space to give you one or two numbers, then that's great. If it makes
Yeah.
sense because your employees seem to understand it better, that's great.
Yeah,
But
I
actually,
always the
day to
same, and
day,
it's
we'll
difficult, isn't
try
it, though,
to
when a
use something
client
else. If I'm
asks
honest.
specifically and they name pie chart, and you're like, "Oh, I don't, I do want to meet the requirements, but at the same time, where's the line
Yeah.
between professional opinion and advice
Yes.
versus what the clients ask for?"
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it is very difficult. But I think once and again, this goes back
Mm,
to, I suppose, what does it look like and how does it
yeah,
interact? The customer's always right until they're wrong, aren't they? Ultimately, so that's. I
yeah,
think You know, if they
Yeah.
really want a pie chart, they can have a pie chart. I'll
Yeah.
make the
Yeah.
justification for other better
Just
charts,
don't tell
but
anybody.
hey, it's, they're paying at the end of the day, aren't they? So
Well, Steve, it's been great to have you on. I
no,
really
hopefully.
appreciate you giving up the time to speak to us.